Hi folks. Uh, for your essays for this subject, I think it's quite important that I give you quite clear instructions on how to get good marks from me. So I'm going to run you through a series of PowerPoints, um, talk a little bit about structure and evidence and a few of the common mistakes that students make so you can avoid them. And that'll make not only writing your essay easier, hopefully, but it'll give you a structure that you can use in other subjects, hopefully, and help you get really good marks for this subject.
Okay, the first thing I just need to cover is if you're on site at Flinders, then the library runs short couple of hour little courses on different aspects of essay writing and study skills. So if you're on campus, you should definitely do them. Okay. Secondly is Studiosity, which is a fantastic service, especially for those of you where English is your second language, right? Always much tougher for you folks. And Studiosity allows you to send in your essay, and it'll be checked just general English and grammar and things like that, and it'll help you with that. So you can search through Flinders' website for that. Also, there's special courses for English as second language through the Student Learning Centre. All right, so make sure you tick all the boxes and get as much free stuff from them as you can. Right, free help. Okay. Next is plagiarism, right? So copying someone else's work, cutting and pasting from the internet or wherever, or buying your stuff online. They all cut and paste and copy. So you will have to hand up your work online through Flinders Learning Online, so Flow, and it will go through what's called Turnitin software, and basically that does a Google search of every sentence, every word on your essay. It searches the internet for it, and if it comes up with a match, then I get a report on it, right? So for every student that I have, I get a percentage of how much of the work is copied from somewhere else, right? And so there will always be a certain percentage, even if it's just your bibliography, right, will match somewhere on the internet, and quotes and things like that will turn up, and you can hand up your essay on each of the Flow pages for each subject. There'll be a Turnitin box, a drop box where you can test to see if you've made a mistake and not put quotations around things or whatever, right? So you can test it. But when you hand it up, I will get a report, and you'll see here that 79% of this essay is copied from somewhere else, right? And it even tells me where 75% of it is from keia.org, right? And it'll highlight every sentence, right? So where it's from. So you cannot get away with plagiarism. So please don't do it. I'm begging you, don't do it, all right? It's impossible to get away with it now, okay? Cool. All right, because I don't want to see any of you people fail because of plagiarism issues, okay? Right. Next thing is referencing. I don't care what style of referencing you use, Oxford, Harvard, Chicago, IEEE, etc. My personal opinion is that Oxford referencing style is the best. So that's footnotes and a bibliography. whatever style you use, you'll need a bibliography, but I think having footnotes rather than in text like Harvard style is better because you can put information in there. It's a full reference rather than just a short one, so the reader can instantly see where it's from, and you can write other information in there if you like, right? And it just saves, I like it as a marker and as a reader because I don't have to continually flip to the bibliography to see what that reference was, right? And there's a Flinders guide that every university has one. I probably need to update my slide here, but one that's particularly easy to use is Deacon's, right? But every university will have one that you can go on and learn, right? So whichever one takes your fancy. Also, if you are going to if this is your last essay in third year and you're not going to go on to honours, then okay, then that's fine, right? But if you are in first or second or even at the start of third year, or you're going to do honours, or especially if you're going to do a thesis in honours or masters or PhD, it's worth learning a software program that makes referencing and writing a bibliography much easier, right? So you can download EndNote from the library website for free for students, and instead of having to put all the commas and the semicolons and the italics and the quotation marks and remembering where everything goes for your bibliography and your footnotes, this software just has fields, right? So you'll have the name of the article in one field and a name of the journal it's from in another, and the date and the pages and etc., right? And it puts it all in there for you at the click of a couple of buttons, right? And you only have to do that once. If you repeat any references from the same article or book or wherever, then you don't even have to type it in again, right? You just click on the reference in your library that you've built up, and it just puts it straight in. So save you so much time, and it's correct, right? Like, you don't want to get docked marks for not formatting your bibliography correctly, right? So this does it all instantly. It can take a little time to learn how to use the software, like any software, but definitely worth your time. Okay. All right, let's get to the essay writing itself. So what markers are looking for, and me in particular, is structure, right? So that means, so if you've ever been handed an essay back with, comments about poor structure and you haven't actually known what they meant, what it means is the signposting that goes on in an essay that tells the reader exactly what point you're trying to make, right? So that's everything from the title and the introduction section with a good thesis statement and a clear essay plan, plus it's the subtitles. I personally like subtitles. I think they're very important. They tell the reader what the point of the next little section is. So all that sort of mapping, signposting, helping the reader know what's coming next and what was just said and summarizing for them, all of that is sort of the structure, right? And so I'm going to spend most of my time on that, but also markers are looking for, once they understand your argument, right, which is really a lot about your structure, right? You've explained it clearly. Then it's the evidence you have for backing up your claims, right? The logic, the quotes, the usually, in international relations, it's going to be historical examples, or stats, all that sort of evidence, or just plain logic, right? Is that evidence strong, right? Have you supported your claims well? Okay. So how do we get these good marks? Okay. So the first step is to make sure you've got a good essay question, right? And even if in some of your classes, some of your lecturers may still have the idea of setting you open-ended questions, right? But I actually think that that's a disaster. That makes it much harder for students, right? So if you get an open-ended question, you should ask if you can change it a little bit, right? So, and what I mean by a good question is, or a good title, is it should either be a yes or no question, right? Or it should just state the conclusion that you're going to argue for, right? Because this is the first signpost. This is probably the most, one of the most important signposts to tell the reader what the hell this essay is about. What's the point, right? Academic writing is not like writing a novel. Academic writing is full of complex arguments and trains of logic and evidence that are really hard to follow. And so you don't leave it to the end like in a novel, the surprise twist or whatever. You are stating it again and again, straight up, right up front, right? And so the first opportunity to do that is in a good title, right? So either it's a yes or no question, right? Or it's the conclusion. And so as an example of a yes or no format, one might be, did the USSR's declaration of war against Imperial Japan trigger their surrender? Right? So that's a yes or no. So it's what this essay is about has been narrowed down to a yes or a no. So I know, which you're going to argue for at least, and in the introduction you'll tell me which you're arguing, right? So nice and clear, I know exactly what this is about. Or you just make it your conclusion, and that's probably my preferred way, but yes or no question's okay too. But it's just as easy to state it as your conclusion. So here the example would be, the USSR's declaration of war against Japan was the trigger for their surrender. That's the title of your essay, right? So I know exactly, right from the first words, from the first sentence, I know exactly where this essay is going to go, right? And setting up a good question like this means that it helps you write a clear essay, right? It helps you write to a clear conclusion. If a good mark is all about having a clear, strongly supported conclusion, not wandering around just telling me everything about a topic, right? So you shouldn't use just broad topics, right? Like the Asian financial crisis as the title of your essay, because that could be anything. You could argue about anything within that, right? It's not a conclusion, it's not a question, right? It's just this vague topic. And definitely don't say, as the title of your paper, research on the Asian financial crisis, right? Don't tell me you're going to research something. Tell me the conclusion of your research, right? And these rules for creating a good essay question, or title, I should say, goes for all titles, so subtitles included. So subtitles should either be a yes or no question, or much better, just state the conclusion of the section under it, right? What is the point you're going to make? That should be your title. Stay away from broad, vague topics, right? Okay. Next, so the structure of an essay. All good academic writing, or at least easy to read and understand academic writing, has a very visible structure, right? So what's a good structure? The structure of an essay means the signpost that you're telling the reader what's going on and where you're going, right? So, and the aim is to be extremely clear. So the reader should always know what you're on about, right? They should never have to be trying to work it out, right? It's not like a novel. So in academia, there's two general formats for academic papers, right? Or theses, right? So there's qualitative or quantitative, right? And so in a quantitative one, the paper or the thesis or the article or whatever is the entire paper revolves around a test, right? So usually in politics or international relations, that test is a correlation, right? A statistical correlation, and so the paper it revolves around explaining what you've done in that experiment, right? And statistics and can hide a lot of assumptions, and so the format of a quantitative paper is trying to sort of tease out why you included this data and what your parameters were and what your assumptions were and that sort of thing, right? So it has a very specific format, and so that is on the right you'll see there's an abstract and an introduction with an essay plan, right? It has a literature review, but then it has a whole chapter on methodology, right? Which will be quite substantial, right? And then you'll have the actual data analysis and the results, right? And then you'll have a discussion and recommendations about those results, sort of like a conclusion, but you're discussing the actual experiment. So in international relations, so my field, which is probably the subjects you'll be doing with me, it's not normal for us to get a quantitative essay. It's fine if you want to do that if you have a statistical background or want to learn it as you go, then that's great. And if your paper is the linchpin of it is the statistical correlation test, then you need to use this quantitative format, right? Because it signals to the reader the type of evidence that you have, right? But most of the essays I get, 99% of them will be qualitative, right? So this is so qualitative is you're using case studies or detailed case study or a theme with examples or a claim with examples. So I'm going to spend the rest of this little this little lecture about qualitative essays. Okay, so the structure for a qualitative essay is an abstract, an introduction section. So an introduction section is very important, right? If you don't get it right, your paper will probably be limited to only a passing grade, right? And so an introduction has, as part of it, has a thesis statement and an essay plan, okay? I'll talk a little bit about that more next, but then you have a literature review and then the body of your paper, right? And so it'll be broken up by intersections, and so it'll either be you'll have several detailed case studies, or you'll have a theme, or claims, right? These are what you have is a series of claims or arguments that lead to a conclusion, right? And you're going to state that claim in the subtitle, and then the section will be you presenting evidence to prove it, right? And then your conclusion will be you wrap it up nicely with a little summary of the evidence and the arguments, and tie it up with a nice punchy bow. Okay. So the most important paragraph in your essay will be the introduction section, right? Your marker or any reader should be able to read the introduction and know exactly what your essay is and does, and how you're going to prove it, right? So now, if you are undergrad, or even in your coursework for honours and masters, and coursework for your PhD if you've got that, we don't expect you to do an abstract or a literature review, right? Because in your normal university writing, you don't have enough words, you don't have enough time to do to waste them on an abstract and a literature review, right? So if you're going to do a literature review, it'll be set for you as a separate sort of task I would normally do. So in a normal undergrad essay, you won't have an abstract and you won't have a literature review. Okay. But what is the purpose of each of these sections, right? It's very good. It's very important to understand the purpose of things rather than just rote learning things. You should understand the purpose of what you're doing, and that way you can make sure it succeeds in fulfilling that purpose, right? So the purpose of an abstract is it's the first signpost, right? It's really a little summary for people flicking through hundreds of articles in journals, trying to find ones that will help them learn about their topic, right? Or argue or support, or provide evidence for their article, right? So in an abstract, all you're doing is you're saying what is the conclusion and what sort of evidence is used to support it, right? You won't really give an essay. You can give an essay plan, but it's more important to sort of say what your evidence is, right? So this uses a case study to support the argument that blah blah blah. So then you have an introduction, right? And so here you're stating what is the problem you're going to solve, right? And if this is a thesis, these sections from now on will actually be whole chapters, right? So you'll have an introduction chapter, but obviously in an essay it's just a paragraph or two. So the purpose of that paragraph or chapter is what is the problem you're going to solve, right? And why is it important if it's not obvious, right? So in academia we're trying to stay away from trivial problems and answer important ones, right? And so you have to explain what to the reader, why waste your time reading my essay, right? Why is this problem important? Then as part of that introduction paragraph, you have a thesis statement. Thesis statement is what is your conclusion, right? And say it exactly, right? Lots of people write, this paper will present analysis about the Korean War, right? Don't tell me you're going to research something or analyze it. Tell me the result of your analysis, right? So tell me the conclusion. Then you're going to have an essay plan, right? And the essay plan is the roadmap of your arguments, right? What are the claims that you make that added together support your conclusion? Okay. So then the body of your essay, so you're going to have claim number 1 or subtitle number 1, and you're going to have the supporting evidence. Claim number 2, supporting evidence. Claim number 3, supporting evidence, right? And then the conclusion is to remind the reader of the whole argument, right? Because you can get lost in the detail, right? So you remind them again how it all sort of fits together, and you tie it up with a nice little bow, right? Okay, so the introduction paragraph is the most important paragraph or chapter, most important paragraph in the entire essay. If you don't get it right, you'll probably only get a pass. Okay, so here's an example of a good essay thesis statement, and in it, so what you'll see here is, so the title is, has the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty worked, right? So yes or no question, not vague in any way, okay? Then it has an introduction sentence. The recent test of a nuclear weapon by North Korea has caused some to argue that the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, has been a failure. Right, so it's setting up the problem, and it even sets up a few straw men to argue against, right? So this is the problem. Then, despite the outlier of North Korea, this essay will argue, and that's a very important little phrase, right? You should use that. This essay will argue that the NPT has worked. That's the thesis statement, right? And you signal it very clearly to a marker who's marking hundreds of papers a month, right? By using the phrase, this essay will argue, right? This essay will argue that the NPT has worked. The following points will be presented to support this conclusion. Firstly, and I like numbers in essay plans because, again, it makes it very clear for a marker. You can smudge these things and be clever with them later on when you're writing articles for journals, but even then, clarity is far more important than style or something, right? So anyway, so the following points will be presented to support this conclusion. Firstly, while it has not stopped proliferation, it has slowed it. Secondly, it has enabled the spread of nuclear power for electricity generation while blocking the spread of nuclear weapons. Thirdly, the inspections regime of the NPT has been successful in warding off new nuclear security dilemmas and resulting nuclear arms races. Finally, it has been instrumental in helping to build a moral norm against the possession of nuclear weapons. The conclusion drawn is that despite some illegal behaviour by the few, the NPT has helped many resist the need for nuclear weapons. Right? So that is a really good introduction sentence, thesis statement, and essay plan. Right? And you need to deal with counter arguments, but these are your positive arguments, right? And I would advise you to deal with counter arguments underneath these, within these sections, rather than doing a pros and cons, which sort of it sucks all the momentum out of your argument, because you're half your essay, the last half, which should be the most powerful, is actually countering counters, and it's much better to present the evidence for supporting each claim, and then say, and then counter any counters within it. Okay. Anyway, In the case of a paper whose main argument is a list of things, right, then your essay plan doubles as your thesis statement, right? So, for example, this paper will argue that the most important impediments to solving global warming are the following: firstly, secondly, thirdly, etc. Right? So that's how you would do it if you have a list of things, right? And make sure it's like you state that these are the most important things, because usually if it's a list of things, then the list could potentially be infinite, right? And you don't want the marker to say, well, what about this point, right? You want to say, look, these are the key ones, and argue why. Okay, so I've just shrunk that paragraph, right? Our introduction paragraph, and I just want to talk about how the subtitles connect to the essay plan. Right? So my first point was, firstly, while the NPT has not stopped proliferation, it has slowed it. So my first subtitle has to be about that, right? Reasonably rarely, but sometimes I get essays handed up that they've obviously been listening enough during this lecture to get that they have to have an essay plan, but then they've gone to sleep and the essay plan doesn't match the body of the essay, right? Or the body of the essay is in a different order to the essay plan. That's no good, right? The essay plan has to mirror the subtitles in the body of your paper, right? I actually think that the language of them should mirror very closely as well, right? So here I've got, firstly, while the NPT has not stopped proliferation, it has slowed it, and my first subtitle is not stopped but slowed, right? And you'll notice that it's a conclusion. I know what is going to be argued under that subtitle, right? And you can read the rest. All right. So these are all very clear subtitles, right? Because all titles have to be either a yes or no question or a conclusion. Okay. So just to wrap up, just a few other little points. Grammar is important. Like you'll get away with a couple of clanger sentences, or that if they're not in your introduction section, right? But if it's more than a couple, then grammar is going to hurt your marks, right? So use Studiosity, get someone else to read it, get ahead in your work so you can put essays away for a few days and then come and read them with fresh eyes, right? Because grammar is important. The next little point is you need to stay within the academic tone, right? So the academic tone is what you're aiming for is a detached, unbiased, careful, calm social scientist, right? And what you're doing is you're just presenting the facts. You don't care where those facts led to, but you are just presenting to the reader, look, these are the facts and this is the conclusion, and any reasonable person would agree, right? That's the tone you're going for. So you don't want to be too weak, right? So especially for thesis statements, I often get something like, this essay will try to show that, that's too weak, right? So this essay will argue is firm but not over the top, right? Or too casual, right? You shouldn't reference yourself or your family. My dad always used to say, try and keep references to yourself out of it, right? You shouldn't become visible to the reader, right? You're a scientist presenting facts, right? You're not talking about yourself. Because this essay isn't your opinion, you're just presenting facts, right? Though the most common one is being too strong, right? So, for example, some of my so-called academic colleagues have suggested ridiculous arguments that not only make me question their intelligence, but also their morals, right? You don't want to sound too heated. Don't use too many adverbs. Don't shout, right? Don't use all caps, in your writing, right? Figuratively as well as literally. So don't insult the people you're disagreeing with. This goes for debates too, though I've got another video about that. But you don't want to be too emotional, right? Because if you're too weak or too casual or too strong, too emotional, it makes you look biased, right? Or maybe even not quite rational, right? You want to be the cool, detached, calm social scientist that's simply presenting facts that point to a particular conclusion. Okay. So I'll just finish on deciding what to argue, especially so in most undergrad subjects you'll either be given questions, which is nice, or though you can change them, ask for permission. If they're open-ended, you want to get them into a yes or no question or a conclusion, right? But especially in subjects where they ask you to come up with your own question, or your honours thesis or master's or PhD, it can be very difficult to sort of decide on what to do. And I kind of think that there's three main strategies for doing that, right? So you either start with a puzzle, something that you've stumbled across, it's strange, it needs explanation. Why did Trump win? Why has the Syrian war gone on so long? That sort of thing. So you're working at a possible explanation and presenting an argument for why it's plausible, right? Or the second one is you start with a mission, right? So you start with a purpose. You decide where you want to end up. Gay rights or deterring cyber attacks or universal basic income. So you've got a mission. You think that there's a practical or a moral imperative for some action, and you're presenting arguments for it, right? The third one is really the same as the first two. They're all the same, really, I suppose, but you start with a conclusion, especially so if you're writing your honours or your master's thesis, even your PhD, like you just don't have time to research your way into a problem like an academic can stumble across problems, puzzles in their work, right? But as a student, these days you just don't have time for that. So I think the best strategy is to just choose a conclusion and argue for it, right? So your research time isn't spent trying to find a topic that you believe in. Choose a conclusion, and your research is spent trying to find evidence to prove it, right? That's a much more efficient way, because in the end, especially, well, all of your essays and honours and masters and PhD, the purpose of it is for you to demonstrate that you can construct an argument that is logical, with best academic practice, and is really well supported with good evidence, right? So I hope that helps. I hope that's, despite it being a little bit long, it's in a video format, so you can rewind and pause at the bits that you need to when you get to writing your essays. You can review it. And so definitely use this template for my subjects, and I think it's a good template for whatever essay you're writing. It helps you to be clear. It's a good way to plan your essay. Writing an essay plan is a good way of planning an essay. So I really look forward to reading your essays, and wish you all the very best.